good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are. My name is Lucinda, and I am thrilled to be joined by a group of expert innovators to discuss with me how to build a data-driven organization. So please join me in welcoming Julie Bowerman, Chief Global Digital Consumer and Customer Experience Officer at the Kellogg Company, Ainul Huda, SVP of Global Head of Audience Development, Analytics and Social at Conde Nast, and Angela Zapida, Chief Marketing Officer, Hyundai Motor America. It's great to have you all. Thank you so much for joining me and for agreeing to demystify data with us today. But to kick us off then, can we try and define this idea of a data-driven organization? I'd love to kind of hear what your definition of a data-driven organization is. And then maybe thinking back over the innovations in the last 12 months or so, how would you rate your company's abilities on a scale? Julie, should we start with you?
Sure. Hi, nice to be here. Thanks for having me. I think three things that kind of jump to mind when I think about, how do you define a data-driven marketing? First of all, you need to have the data and the tools and the technology tools. I think that's kind of a common understanding. But I think there's three things that are really important. First, I think there's got to be alignment across kind of all your functions that, your data is your single source of truth. When you're a brand like ours, where you have a long history of performance and measurement, you have to kind of shift your thinking in terms of, this is kind of our source of truth. And while we have a lot of historical references, I think there's an important mind shift there as well. Accessibility is a very important part of building a data-driven organization. Breaking down the silos of who has access to what data, and creating kind of friendly, usable, accessible tools for all to access. And then I think the last one that's really important, and candidly, one that we are working really hard at, is more culture and ways of working. So we're having to think much more in a test and learn, agile kind of mindset versus typically we plan months out for a promotion or a media plan, and we kind of wait and see what happens, where this is a much more kind of test and learn, optimize, kind of figure out as you go a little bit. And that's an uncomfortable part of it. So culture becomes a really important part of, I think, a successful data-driven marketing organization.
Great, thank you.
You want me to keep going?
Please, Angela, yeah.
Well, I loved everything that Julie just said. I thought that was fantastic. I mean, for us at Hyundai, we've had a lot of data. We've always had a lot of data. That's part of the auto business. In fact, sometimes we have too much data. It's almost how do you distill the right things to know what you need to do next. I think the biggest thing for us is to have executive sponsorship and leadership on having a data-driven organization. And being able to use that data in a way that there's, to Julie's point, there's a single point of truth. I remember there was about almost 2 years ago, we used to use leads as this indicator to sales. And it was a big metric for us for a long time. And the thing that was happening was, the truth is, you could actually buy leads. And so those leads, though, even though we were filling up, a part of our marketing funnel, so to speak, with these leads, they weren't converting to high quality leads. And it actually took executive sponsorship with our CEO, who had come in 2 years ago, about the time I came into Hyundai, to say, look, I really want a dashboard of key performance metrics that really are showing what we put in market is really driving sales. And in that moment in time, we shifted from leads to search, because search is the first thing that someone does once they're interested in buying a vehicle. But it took executive sponsorship, and that's probably a simple example of how this has happened many times over the last 24 months, on how it really took someone at a senior position to say, no, we're actually going to look at the dashboard in this way. This is now the new list of qualifiers we're going to look at that's actually going to help drive our business. And I think being able to constantly innovate and get an organization behind that innovation is probably one of the biggest obstacles. It's very difficult to take data out of the hands of people who used it in a certain way for a very long time and say, no, we're actually going to put it in this one single area, a single source of truth, and redefine what those metrics mean and how we're going to use them moving forward. And so for me, I think if we had not had executive sponsorship, I think that maybe we would still be miring in sort of sub-departmental metrics that then didn't lead to a bigger goal to meet our, corporate goals. So I think for me, I would add on to that, to what Julie said, which I agree with wholeheartedly, her 3 points.
Fantastic.
Wonderful. Angela, thank you. Lucinda, thanks for having me here. And I couldn't agree more everything that Julie and Angela said. Just building off that, I'll just add a couple of 3 more dimensions. So number one, it also, from my experience, be that Condé and some of the prior places I've worked at, it also depends on what stage of the business you're at. So initially, when you start as a company, having a data org means just making sure that you have the right and accessible data and you're driving right decisions. As you more matured, my personal definition of a good data org company is that it drives consumer value at the end of the day by leveraging good data, and does it drive good operational efficiencies, right? So really tying in to the goal of the data org or any analytics org, to be honest, to the larger business goal. So that's one. Second, and I think I really liked what Angela talked about is defining what's the right KPI. For a long time, again, like Conde Nast is a publishing company, and like for us, and like Conde Nast, there's so many other places like Adweek and Bathurst and so on. So as a publishing world, for a long time, that people did chase after reach the overall volume. But if you think about it, like there was a big pivot a few years back to think about really quality audiences, right? How do you think about not just eyeballs, but quality eyeballs? It's like, is then a piece of content that people are willing to pay for? Now, even to get to the conclusion, you need to have some fundamentals, principles in defining your KPIs. Like, is it smart? Is it is it simple, measurable, actionable? But also equally important, is it tangible? Can you do something about it? So I think there's a third component is having a philosophy in defining your KPI that drives the company budget and the consumer value. And the last thing I would talk about in terms of having a strong data organization, when does the data go from in the hands of executive to the operation workflows? So I think if you think about a lot of challenges at times that what happens with data teams, how much time do you spend in informing executive, somebody senior, then can it be balanced with people who's doing the work on day-to-day basis? Can you get them the data in the right way, in the right time, in a very easy manner that can drive that efficiency? Because at the end of the day, what, in my opinion, at least for our industry, what really separates you from somebody else, what is your speed from strategy, from insights to strategy to execution? And to me, I think having the data into people who drive the business on a day-to-day basis is super important.
Thank you. You mentioned an interesting point, and actually, Angela, you brought it up as well. How do you measure when your efforts at driving data efficiency have succeeded? I mean, it's different for each of you because you're different companies. It depends on the specific type of activation or pillar or area that you're working on. But has anyone got an example they can share? I mean, is it reducing wastage? Is it more sales? Like, how do you know that your data efforts? How do you define that capability and KPI?
It's always about sales at the end of the day. Whether you're part of the business contributed or not, but I mean, for us, that's what we always look at, is how did it drive sales, which is why moving to search was really key, because for a long time, we had a hard time qualifying what that marketing spend was getting for us. And of course, there's new tools now that we use. We buy a lot of television, for example. It's very hard to know what attribution is with that, but there's actually new platforms that are helping us get smarter about that, like Video Amp. Really understanding who is able to watch one of our commercials and what are they doing after that. That helps a lot. So I think the evolution and the innovation that's happening is it's giving us that groundwork we need to go in with a lot of confidence to say, this is actually how much money we should spend and not overspend. That's part of the whole game too. I mean, you could just keep spending and spending and spending, but to what end? We came to a conclusion this year. We were overspending in television, for example, and there was a point of diminishing return. that money was reinvested back into digital. And then we had all of those other metrics that we could see so much more easily in digital efforts to say, actually, this is working. This is where we could see people interacting and engaging with our actual content, and then hoping to see that they're going to our then website and engaging through the digital shopping process. So it's gotten much more complex, yet the picture is a lot more clear. We just had to put the pieces together and understand better about, there was a huge disconnect between, let's say, upper funnel and lower funnel. And I think that's starting to shrink a little bit. And we're starting to put those connection points together. But for us, it is, at the end of the day, it's about sales.
Yeah, I think for us, like one of the things we're in a fortunate position. So we have had a Kellogg's Family Rewards loyalty program in place for years, and so we have a lot of data about our brands and about our consumers that we can build off of. But kind of, I think Ainul said it, that more data is not necessarily a good thing, and so really being clear on what are the use cases that are going to create the most value. And so we've undergone an effort across kind of most of our markets. I'll give you an example, like in Latin America, they've designed, very specific use cases. And they've said, in this use case, here's the value we're going to derive out of that. In some cases, it's sales. In some cases, it's improved profitability. In some cases, it's productivity. And based on kind of in that definition of those use cases and doing that work on the upfront, they're able to see kind of what use case drives the most value. That becomes the way in which they measure it and prioritize the different use cases. And then also, like, what data do you tap into and how do you use the data to inform those metrics is the approach that we've taken.
So I think I'll just build off on everything that Angela and Julie has talked about. And I think probably, as you can imagine, like Conde Nast has various brands, be it New Yorker, Vogue, Wired, and so on and so forth. And we play in the intersection of multiple revenue streams, be it subscription membership, e-commerce, or even less commercially, that's ad sales. Now, one of the things that I think the role of the marketer has evolved, in my opinion, and why data becomes so much important, is to take the conversation at a level higher, how you think about content, product, and distribution together. So to me, marketing is a form of distribution, and then so is content and product. So one thing that has really helped out, looking from a multi-touch attribution basis, as an example for one of our titles, what drives subscription? Now, I think probably when you think about isolation in marketing in isolation, sometimes it can have suboptimal results because your marketing is as good as your product. So right now, when you're having a conversation with the C-suite and with the entire C-suite, be it the CFO or CEO, I think partnering with different functions, let's say, thinking about investments, saying, you know what, we can invest so much more into marketing, which could be digitally, be it social, search, upper funnel, lower funnel. But perhaps the right idea could be to investing a bit more into your product and content, which could mean the reallocation of resourcing is a very powerful tool to build trust across the whole company. And then you could say, you know what, we can spend so much more on marketing. Our ROI is something X, but we can get even much higher ROI if we took some portion of the money and actually invested in our product and content. So looking and marketing can play a very objective partner in that by helping inform that, to say that, okay, fine, now our marketing is much more efficient because the product is so much more better, and data plays such an important role looking from a multi-touch attribution basis.
You make it sound very easy, but I mean, you sort of touch on the idea that there are silos. That's sort of been, no one really likes silos. Has anyone got any kind of, I suppose, lessons or tips and ways that you'd be able to break down those for our audience who are trying to get more buy-in across the organization?
If you wouldn't mind, I'd like to jump in because I'm right in the middle of something that's a huge project that's right at the heart of this whole thing, which is getting collaboration across an organization. We actually have, from our headquarters in South Korea, they wanted to establish an enterprise-wide global platform for all of Hyundai Motor Corporation. And the hardest thing about this project is that the regions, so North America as a region, we're very sophisticated. We've leaned into data and these platforms for years. So we're way ahead of everyone else, but then other markets, they're just getting going. So it was about level setting, getting best in the tech platform, but then also working with each one of the regions on where we were in that journey. And it's actually the hardest for the US to kind of go backwards and maybe unravel some of these tech platforms so we can be on one universal global or enterprise platform for Hyundai Motor Corp, not just Hyundai Motor America. And the thing that is, again, the thing that pulls us together is executive leadership. So in this case, it is our chairman who wanted this and has asked for a team to work with each one of the regions to come together to figure out how to do this. And for us, we got the ability to say, okay, maybe in year one, we can only bring one of these functions onto a global platform, but we have to draw a roadmap on how maybe the rest of it can get there in the next 3 to 5 years. And that's important. That takes hard collaboration to say, if it isn't about now, then when, and how can we work as a team to map that out? So at least we have the common goal in front of us, but we may not all get there at the same time. And that has to actually be okay, because that's the complexity that falls into place. But again, I think if it wasn't executive leadership, you'd have a hard time getting each department trying to sell the other department that they needed to do what they wanted them to do. I mean, it really does. It's funny how personalities and hard work that people put into already establishing something, it's the unraveling and the taking away that's probably the hardest part. I think implementing something that wasn't there before is actually pretty easy. It's when it's already been established. And for us, we feel like we're a really mature market, and this has been the hardest thing, but you know, we're getting there. But again, it came from the top.
Yeah, I mean, maybe an example for us to talk about kind of how we're breaking down silos is, I think it goes back to what I said before. It's like, okay, what are we all trying to accomplish? And so for an example, might be, we want to improve our in-store execution and be able to kind of measure kind of those in-store metrics that we know are drivers of our business. And so that alone, first of all, we have to have access to the data and the measurement tools that allow us to determine kind of, are we making improvements? Are we measuring against kind of the core metrics of in-store performance? And then the sales organization, the supply chain organization, the brand teams, they all agree to that because they all have a role in saying, you know, our goal is improved store execution, and it's not just one person's role. And I think it started with really kind of defining that use case and defining the data that we're going to use to measure that. And then once you have that and everyone's aligned to it, then the silos kind of naturally and organically break down.
Excuse me.
Bless you. So I'll just add to that, and I think first of all I do agree that we do need any business would require executive sponsor, right? Now I think probably there is a process that I know I have deployed in the past that has worked to break silos, and it actually goes back to very early on what I talked about is setting the principles of setting goals, and do your partners understand that, and what it translates into is just like when somebody says tangible. What does tangible goals mean? How do you set goals as something that you can control? And then if you move that, how does it drive budget? Now, I think having that discussion, number one, and second, through a very like deep analytics to show, because there's so many metrics to move from a customer point of view. You can say, how many customers did I get? Is it how long the customer stayed, or is it more important how many times did they come back? If they come back, so there are a variety of metrics that you can choose, but ultimately what's really important to be able to show that if I move one metric, which is within somebody's control, how does it drive budget, right? It could be subscription, it could be sales, it could be anything else. And what we have found that more somebody understands this connection between what's within their control and how much that moves the budget, I think collaboration does become much more easier, because then you have a common dictionary or a glossary that you can all agree on. And generally we have found it to be a bit more successful taking that approach. And one last point that I would add, which I thought I should have covered early on, is equally important. How do you organize your analytics or data team? And different businesses have different sites. Sometimes it's all centralized, somebody is embedded within the business. And that's what is a trick, in my opinion, is knowing what to centralize and knowing what to decentralize within the business. Because that also enables you the credibility of you as a business group. How strong is your data fidelity, or probably the strength of your models?
Presumably that changes as you mature in your data capabilities, your data literacy, the areas that you centralize. And
100%. 100%. And that's something like having worked in both startups and mature company, and even a mature company, what phase of the journey you are in, that also changes from time to time. But as long as you have these core principles, I mean, one of the core principles that I use within my team is, again, the speed of insights to strategy to execution. If you use that as a core philosophy, then I try to structure my teams around that. So I think that's something that like changes from company to company.
Great. Thank you. I mean, we are fastly running out of time, so I definitely want to get to some audience questions because it's obviously such a huge topic, and it's fantastic having all different perspectives from your respective companies. So one from the audience, from Gillian Fisher, to the whole panel, is there's so much talk about multicultural marketing. How is data informing your approach to meet the minority and majority? Is there anyone who would like to take a first punt at that?
I'll start. We, as a automotive brand that spends a nice sizable amount of money in the market, I'll admit to say that we did not spend enough and are not spending enough solely on multicultural targets. We were capturing attention of our target through a general market buy, but that wasn't enough. I really wanted to hire multicultural agencies, and I wanted to splinter off budgets that were appropriate for each of those target segments. That was really hard work to do. We took a lot of data to try to get to that point because it wasn't an ad. It was taking away from general market to then attack these two target segments that were really anemic, and to be perfectly honest. And we had to use all kinds of data to inform that decision. And I want more data, and we're about ready to hire a Hispanic agency. We're hoping they're going to even help us even further. We've had an African-American agency on for about, I want to say about 6 months, and they're bringing a lot of data to the table. That's been super helpful. We couldn't get that data from our general agencies. We had to use the best that we had, but I think getting the expertise is what's really been helpful, and we'll continue to refine that. But it does take data, because it isn't like I can only just ask for more money. I had to then take it away from the general market, and all of that had to be figured in as one solution. But it's been very fascinating, actually, and we're in the journey to figure out how to get to that final endpoint.
Yeah, for us, I mean, we want all marketing to be inclusive. And so we take a very data-centric approach to, who is our population, who is consuming our brands, and we look at across kind of a very diverse set of consumers to inform kind of what is most relevant to those sets of consumers. And so we take, I'd say we think about it kind of more as an inclusive marketing approach, grounded on the data that we have about our consumers. And so we take an audience first approach and kind of market accordingly.
And just to jump in, because you mentioned before that the Kellogg Company is doing some direct consumer initiatives at the moment. Are there any learnings that you can share from that might tie into answering this question in terms of the data that you found, or the learnings?
Yeah, I mean, so some of the learnings that we have that we've gotten from the data that we own or we partner with through our agencies is, what we've learned is consumers definitely prefer trusted brands. So, particularly over the last couple of years, kind of brands that have a lot of history and a lot of credibility have, kind of commanded a stronger preference with consumers. We've also seen across, not just, kind of our multicultural marketing efforts, but across all the kind of a shift in the way in which our products are consumed. So an example would be, instead of 3 meals a day, we do a lot more snacking and grazing. And then another example would be, obviously with kind of the health and wellness concerns, we've been able to develop an innovation pipeline very oriented, again, against, sets of consumers that have appealed to, for example, maybe gut well-being or gut health. And so it's really informed the way in which we innovate and build a pipeline for brands and products that target those types of consumers.
So I think from a Conde Nast perspective, it starts with a content and product again. So I think for a long time, what content themes we are covering. So one is starts with content and product, and the second aspect that I would talk about is highlight is around what kind of data enhancement we need. For example, for you to again to be actionable and tangible, what we found out that we may have certain piece of information and may give you certain demographics information, but that may not be at a granular level that you need. So next steps being intentional, what kind of data enhancement that you have to make. And we had to use some new data set to help inform that. So in a way, that's very granular, saying that what kind of content topics we have, and the certain content topics appeal to a more broader groups of people that we want to target. So I think once we did solve for the data enhancement and helping us inform at a level that we can really take some action, the next started around like what kind of channels and how do we talk about certain content, what's the tone and voice, and what kind of creatives we offer, and how do we talk about in a very authentic way that really appeals to a wide variety of audiences that we were really hungry about. So I think it's a combination of starting both a product and content and then tying it to your marketing and distribution.
Brilliant. Okay. Another question here from the audience. David Buckland is asking the panel, what is your view on the need for a chief data officer on the executive leadership team? Is this a necessity for success in a data-driven organization?
Who wants to start this one?
I mean,
we don't have one on ours, so I don't know.
I don't think one person or one title can solve a company's, or be responsible. And I think sometimes when you give someone that title, it can almost be, have a counter benefit, because it kind of communicates to the organization, they got it, it's not my responsibility. And I think in a capability like this, it's got to be everybody's responsibility. I think you consistently are hearing that across us, that it can't just reside in one person or one team or one function. And so I think that's, I wouldn't say I have a, for sure not on that role, but I think it's important that everybody agrees the importance that everybody has a role in it.
So I think what I would add to that. Sorry?
I said, go ahead.
Okay, so what I would add to that, again, I've been in different companies and so on, and at Condé we have a chief data officer, and one of the things that is helpful from an executive sponsor point of view, somebody who has laser focus on data fidelity, in terms of be it consistent, accurate data, accessible data. I think there are opportunities I think depending on the company, that could be really important in what stage of the company they are in, what's the journey. So I think there are needs in terms of making sure that we have a strong infrastructure, that we have data accessibility, and we have good data and dictionary. So from that angle, I think there's a strong case to be made that there is a need for executive sponsor, whether you call it chief data officer, chief analytics officer. I think it really depends on the industry that you are in.
Fantastic. And Angela, do you have anything else that you want to add as one of our final thoughts before we wrap?
Yeah, I mean, we don't have a chief digital officer. We have a senior vice president of IT services, and he really comes at it to support all of the business functions. So he really is the one that integrates and helps get alignment on what that tech platform is. But the actual strategy and what each business department needs, that is coming from each one of the executives who oversee each one of those departments. So it works. Again, it takes collaboration, and it takes having one goal as a company. And I think when you have that, then it can work in sort of this hybrid fashion. So our technology expertise is really just to help us get those tech platforms on and making sure that it works across the organization as needed, or where it needs to plug in, it plugs in correctly. But the actual strategy and what's needed, that's really a collaborative effort that's with many people. So I think what everyone's saying, it really is a difficult role for one person to own wholly.
Yeah. Amazing. Well, I have many more questions, and there's more questions coming from the audience, but I'm afraid we are out of time. But thank you all so much for sharing your experiences and your expertise and your knowledge. It's been really fantastic to have you, and I really hope that we can invite you all back in person, if not to another virtual stage very, very soon. So thank you
Thank you.
all so much.
Thank you,
That's
Lucinda.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye-bye.